It's Tuesday, September 27th. The wind can destroy homes, the water can destroy cities. We start here. Florida residents are being urged to evacuate as officials scramble to prepare for floods.
We got to move, and we got to get people out now.
Our team is in Tampa, bracing for what could be its worst hurricane in a century. We knew some Russians were angry about being sent off to war. We weren't expecting this.
This man goes into this recruitment office in Siberia. You hear a shot being fired.
Turns out not everyone's got the same chance of being called up. That's putting the region even more on edge. And did Italy just elect its next Mussolini?
She decided to join this youth wing of what was then, an offshoot of the former fascist party.
With the far right ascendant in Europe, critics are worried they just voted in a fascist. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. Certain parts of the Gulf Coast have been hit with several hurricanes in recent years. Others, for one reason or another, have largely been spared. The city of Tampa, Florida, hasn't seen a direct hit in its city limits for more than 100 years, which is a good thing for Tampa because it is uniquely susceptible to flooding.
We have a lot of low-lying areas in this county, and the projected storm surge is significant.
Well, last night, a storm known as Tropical Storm Ian became Hurricane Ian. It passed by Cuba and now is a major hurricane on its way to Florida. ABC's chief meteorologist Ginger Z starts us off from Tampa. And Ginger, I guess the biggest question this morning is, where and when is Ian going to hit?
Yes, and this has been the question going through the weekend as Floridians have been preparing. The cone has been wide, and it stayed wide a little longer than we usually like to see. The reason behind that, the two main computer models that you'll often hear us talking about, the American and the European, were hugely different when they got to Florida. The GFS, or the American model, was trying to take it into the Panhandle, or at least the Big Bend, where the European model was regularly and stubbornly staying in southwest or central Florida, like Tampa. I know that it was seeing this front. There's a front that is going to pause and slow down this storm, then eventually absorb it, and the European model was right.
There is no scenario where we will not feel significant impacts.
And that's where we see this storm headed now, into western central Florida, a place that doesn't get this strength of hurricane often.
So we have a lot of coastal residents that probably don't have a ton of experience with major hurricanes.
We had one Cat 3 or greater a century ago. We've had 5 come within 50 miles within the century or the history of Tampa. And we've seen a lot of change in Tampa. So to see this type of storm in this direction approach this city and this bay and all the waterways that make Tampa what it is frightening.
It's 6 to 8, 10 feet of storm surge. And remember, this is like a wall of water coming in, and it will come in very rapidly, very powerfully. This could push houses off of their foundation.
I also just want to make sure everyone knows that the absolute worst impacts for Tampa, Sarasota, Clearwater, St. Pete would be Wednesday night through Thursday morning. That's that time period where the storm just sits and barely moves. And that is when all the water piles up, when all the rain is falling, and when the heftiest winds are going to be moving through.
Yeah, I was going to say, if some hurricanes are all about wind speeds and structure damage, there are also hurricanes that are all about storm surge and flooding, right? Is that what this is about to be?
Yes, the proximity to the coast that the storm actually makes it, because every 5 to 10 miles is going to make a huge difference in how much St. Pete, for example, is going to get 100-plus mile-per-hour gusts. That can wreck things. But this storm is not necessarily about wind. It is mostly about storm surge, that piling up of water into very susceptible and converging storm surge, which is what's going to happen in Tampa Bay and all those rivers that connect.
Get some bags for myself, for my house, and for my mother-in-law. Just trying to make sure that the water doesn't get in where it normally does when it heavily rains.
That plus the heavy rain, when you add 10 to 15 inches of rain on a place that floods when you get a thunderstorm, this place floods, you're going to have a problem. And so I was just speaking to one of the local meteorologists and asking him about the watershed. They have been extremely wet here, so they're already super saturated. They have a reservoir at the Hillsborough River Dam that is likely very high, and I've got to call in there because I need to know how high and what their plan is, because to release that, we may end up with a Houston situation where the area around the dam has to flood, or they've got to send flooding water down into Tampa. There are so many people that are susceptible here. And here's the big difference with Tampa. When you flood this place, it is so at sea level that if you put a 9-foot surge, you could cover areas inland by miles. That doesn't happen with surge. You usually get surge and then you stop it a block or two in, maybe a half mile. But to talk about covering an entire 3-mile little peninsula that sticks in between the old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay, that's insane.
Oh, you just have entire neighborhoods underwater.
Correct.
The Florida National Guard has activated 5,000 Florida Guardsmen, as well as 2,000 additional Guardsmen from Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina that have been activated to help.
Well, and government officials actually have had states of emergency in effect for a few days now. Like, what sort of preparations are you seeing there on the ground?
So when we were here 2 years ago for Tropical Storm Eta, which had winds of 50 miles per hour, it moved pretty quickly and it fizzled out really fast when it hit the coast. We had a 4-foot surge that came at low tide, and there was significant flooding.
Of course, all of our residents are buttoning up their homes, and that includes storm shutters and taking anything that could be a flying projectile in high winds out of their yard.
So people had prepared just like they're preparing now, putting sandbags. And for that storm, you know, sandbags worked for a lot of people. Not for everyone, but for many people. The same thing's been done here now, but I think the big difference is we haven't seen this.
Trying to get ahead on grocery things and lots of bottled water and batteries so I can use my headlamp when I'm without power for a bunch of days.
If that storm sits and spins, as it is intending to do, for 24 hours, right into the bay, we're going to have a situation that has never been presented in modern day. And I don't think we know how Tampa will look.
We're issuing a mandatory evacuation order for Zone A, recommending a voluntary evacuation for Zone B, and opening emergency shelters. And do not wait. Time is of the essence. Act now.
And because evacuation takes a long time, it's a huge decision for governments to say, we got to move and we got to get people out now. It's a lot of people. And I don't know if you've seen the population growth, but Hillsborough County, for example, the one that has been evacuated in their Zone A, they've had a 27% growth in population in just the last decade. So Tampa has blown up, and they've never seen a storm this close for this long of a duration in their history.
Just don't think that if you're not in that eye, that somehow you don't have to make preparations, because the last thing we would want to see is it start to really bear east quickly and then have folks who are not prepared.
There's no question that the infrastructure and the age of that is old in Tampa. They have both from a plumbing standpoint, from the water and the engineered reality that they've created here, plus the actual infrastructure of, say, power lines. There are neighborhoods that are newer and that have been built to code, but a lot of them haven't been because they haven't needed to be. Just like we saw in Homestead and Miami after Andrew, everything changed. And now they can handle a much grander hurricane. That hasn't happened here. They haven't been forced into change in Tampa. This storm, Ian, may just do that.
Yeah, everyone in Florida kind of getting in place for what could be this sort of major flooding catastrophe. Ginger Z, I know you'll be there for the duration, so stay safe and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up on Start Here, Russia is sending its young men abroad with guns, but some are using them at home. We're back in a bit.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers
in Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7 straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Bring them on. If only there was a place in the morning to start my day. With a smile, somewhere to help me get in the know. A place as spectacular as, well, me.
I think we might know a place, right, guys?
Bring your friends. Oh, wait, there is.
Good morning, America.
GMA, 7A, every day. Boom, boom, boom.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Robin. Good morning, America. How are you?
Boom. Now that's how you start your day, people.
All right, here we go. You ready?
Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you? Yes.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
This is ABC News Live Prime.
Hey there, I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Live reporting, breaking news, exclusives, award-winning, powerful, eye-opening.
How lucky are we?
ABC News Live Prime with Lindsay Davis. All new, streaming weeknights. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
It was a weird day in Russia yesterday. First, Edward Snowden. Yes, that Edward Snowden, the former NSA contractor who stole and leaked U.S. mass surveillance secrets, then fled potential espionage charges, he officially became a Russian citizen.
Mr. Snowden is apparently now a Russian citizen. And again, that makes him subject to any Russian decrees that may come down, including the one we heard about last week.
Then, elsewhere in Russia, a man walked into a classroom and opened fire on students, a national tragedy in a nation with much less gun violence than ours. But for Vladimir Putin, the most concerning trend sweeping the nation is probably how much open resistance they are seeing in the recruitment of new soldiers for his invasion of Ukraine. And yesterday, some of that resistance appeared to get violent. ABC's chief foreign correspondent Ian Pannell is with us now. Ian, we'd heard about protests. Now it appears someone opened fire on a recruiting office. What happened here?
Yeah, I mean, pretty astonishing that it happened, and even more astonishing, it seems almost everything is captured on mobile phone footage these days. But what we see and what we hear is that this man goes into this recruitment office in Siberia. You hear a shot being fired, and then suddenly there are these rows and rows of people sat there, presumably young men who are being forced to sign up to this mobilization. Then you can hear screams, everyone runs for the door, and we believe that one officer was wounded. These were the men who were being told to sign up, and one assumes this was a direct response to that. The gunman himself was arrested, but we're waiting for details on exactly what motivated him. But it wasn't the only incident.
We have reports of multiple arson attacks against recruitment offices in Russia in recent days.
There was also a firebombing of another recruitment centre. Apparently, at least 17 centres across Russia have been targeted in arson attacks. So in some senses, the Russians are showing their anger by trying to halt or interrupt that recruitment process. But in other incidents, they're going further.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like this is not just sort of one group of dissatisfied people or one particularly bold community. It sounds like it's spreading. And if there was a question of whether these protests and public clashes could be sustained, I mean, is that question being answered across Russia, I suppose?
Yes, it's certainly being answered very strongly, particularly in some areas. There seems to be a feeling, and we don't have the numbers to back this up, that Russia's ethnic minorities in particular are being targeted for this forced mobilization. So in the southern Caucasus region of Dagestan, this is on Russia's southern flank in the northern Caucasus, there was a crowd there, again, outside the recruitment centre, when basically violence broke out as they were protesting. Officers arrived on the scene and the crowd basically turned on the officers who were then forced to flee. We've obviously seen reports of other crowds in other areas.
And in St. Petersburg, officers seen kicking a protester in the head. Human rights activists saying more than 2,300 people have been arrested in 35 cities across Russia in recent days.
We know, for example, in Crimea, ethnic Tatars, again, have been targeted overwhelmingly with this recruitment drive, and a lot of people are very angry. And interestingly, it's a lot of women who are coming out on the streets, in particular, mothers, wives, to basically object to the fact that their sons and husbands are being forced to sign up for a war that many of them have been quiet about, but clearly were unhappy about, and they're not ready to support. Others, however, aren't even staying in the country, they're voting with their feet. A lot of Russians have the right to visit neighbouring countries without visas. Georgia, for example, again to Russia's south, has seen thousands and thousands of people. I mean, this incredible long line of vehicles. Some of them, apparently, some of the people inside waiting 30 to 50 hours just to try and get across that border. Some abandoning their vehicles, resorting to scooters, to bicycles, some just walking across on foot. Normally, Georgia wouldn't allow that, but because they've got so many people to deal, and a lot of them, in particular, appear to be fighting-age men.
I took part in protests when the military operation started. For us as citizen activists, things have become very difficult at this moment in our own motherland.
Independent Russian media, for example, is reporting that more than 260,000 may have already fled. And also there are reports that Russia may well clamp down on fighting-age men who could be eligible for conscription to leave, although Russia denies that. There are reports that Georgia might do the same, but some European nations have already said they are going to impose restrictions, and that seems to be feeding this frenzy and this fear.
Oh, like get out now.
Get out now, exactly. Get out while you can before the borders are closed, either by the other side or by the Russian side, or frankly, before the knock on the door comes and someone's there with a gun telling you you've got to go and fight in Putin's war.
Yeah, and I'm still just fascinated by what you said about sort of different ethnic groups within Russia and some of them being targeted more than others. And of course, that can lead to sometimes even more resentment of people saying, yeah, not our war, Vladimir Putin. Ian Panel, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Brad.
Here in the U.S., midterm campaigns are in full swing, but perhaps the most important election in the world this week happened on Sunday in Italy. As a result of these elections, Italians are likely to have their first female prime minister, which is a big deal, but that's not even the most groundbreaking thing people are talking about here. The bigger thing is that she leads an extremely right-wing party. We've seen these sorts of political movements gain power in countries like France, but none of those parties have gotten a prime minister in office. Well, now, Giorgia Meloni is being called Italy's most extreme right-wing leader since Benito Mussolini. ABC's Megan Williams is based in Rome. Megan, it sounded like an emphatic victory, right? Was this surprising from where you sat?
It wasn't surprising for a few reasons. One is the polls all indicated that she and her right-wing coalition would get a fairly strong majority. They got 43%. She got a quarter of the Italian vote, which was more or less what people were predicting. But it also wasn't surprising, not so much because Italy has moved extremely to the right. It's just Italy has a history, particularly in the last 10, 20 years, of trying out something totally new. We saw it with Berlusconi. Let's try a businessman. We saw it with the five-star populist movement a few years ago that has since imploded. Even Mario Draghi, the European central banker who was brought in to try and help usher Italy through its post-pandemic problems, he was hailed as Super Mario. So talking to Italians here, a lot of them said that they were going to vote for her, not so much because they're extreme right, but it's just we've tried everybody else, so let's give her a shot.
Yeah, who is Giorgia Meloni? Am I even saying her name right? Can you speak Italian?
Giorgia
Meloni. Great. Can you just tell, what should we know about her?
Well, she is somebody who became a young, very far-right militant.
I am Giorgia Meloni. I am 45 years old, and I am the president of Fratelli d'Italia, the political party of Italian conservatives.
She grew up in a working-class leftist neighborhood here in Rome, but she somehow felt marginalized as a kid. She was teased for being overweight. She decided to join this youth wing of what was then, an offshoot of the former fascist party.
4 days I have been reading articles in the international press in which I am described as a danger to democracy, to Italian, European, and international stability.
She formed her own party called the Brothers of Italy, Fratelli d'Italia, which is named after a line in Italy's national anthem. She formed that party 10 years ago and has just very patiently been trying to reach the goal of coming to power. And honestly, even 4 years ago, when she got just 4% of the vote, nobody would have predicted this. But here she is.
Well, and you mentioned there, like, the party's roots, I guess. Some Italians have called her sort of a new age fascist. They've used that word, or like a post-fascist is how someone described it. Other Italians have said that's way overselling it. Like, what is the reality? What are you watching for?
For Giorgia Meloni and the far right in Italy, and this is sort of one of her slogans, it means God, fatherland, and family.
Difenderemo Dio, patria e famiglia!
She is proudly Christian. She considers herself a defender of European Christian values, and this ties into the whole migration issue. Italy has dealt with a fairly consistent number of migrants coming to Italy, and that has caused concern for some people.
Il problema della denatalità si possa risolvere facendo entrare gli immigrati.
It's not really a crisis, but it's always depicted as a crisis by the right, and they use the arrival of migrants as somehow proof that Europe is under threat, either from Muslim people arriving or basically just non-European. So that's a big part of her political campaign, is identity politics, essentially, and it extends to, her so-called protection of the family from LGBTQ rights. She is against gay marriage. She's anti-abortion, although she's not going to change Italy's abortion law. She just wants to make it more difficult for women to obtain abortions.
Assolutamente non rappresentata. I don't feel represented by Giorgia Meloni at all because she wants an old society. With her, we're taking many steps backwards.
I mean, she has disavowed her connections to the fascist party and to dictator Mussolini, though, when she was younger, she openly admired him, but she says she doesn't. I mean, it was interesting listening to her victory speech. It was way toned down from her political rallies where she, rails against LGBTQ rights, against migrants, against political correctness. Her speech was much more along the lines of, I'm going to try and govern for everyone. So it was very subdued from the Giorgia Meloni that we've seen in the election campaign.
And when you think of the extreme right wing in so many countries, it often ends up being this kind of isolationist thing. Like, we'll take care of ourselves, not, forget all these foreign wars. Here, one of the things that actually put her apart from liberals and even conservatives in her own country was she was very on board with NATO, on board with, supporting Ukraine. That also seemed to actually get her a lot of points with Italian voters who, like you said, just looking for something different as Italy kind of hurdles towards this next chapter in its history. Thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you, Brad. My pleasure.
And one last thing. What would you do if you saw someone grab a young bird that could barely fly and throw it off a cliff? Because recently in Iceland, a nerve-wracking tradition just wrapped up in which people toss fledgling puffins off cliffs to help them survive.
Puffins are about the size of a Nerf football. Really beautiful. Their bills are the highlight.
That's Don Lyons from the National Audubon Society here in the States, where he's the director of conservation science for what they call Project Puffin.
Puffins do have a fairly unexpected sound. I've heard it described as a mild groan or even resembling a cow mooing.
He spends his summers on islands in Maine trying to keep these little black birds safe.
When I see a baby puffin, should I be flinging him off the side of a cliff? Is that suddenly what the cool kids are doing now?
No, puffins are perfectly capable of leaving their nesting burrows and finding the ocean on their own.
Now, Lyon says what we're seeing in Iceland is kind of a weird-looking solution to a specific problem. When puffins hatch, they hang out in their little burrows for several weeks, then fly off on their own to the sea, where they spend the next several years on their lonesome. The only thing they have to guide them on that first flight is the light of the moon. But there's a problem. In Iceland, city lights are getting puffins confused, and instead of heading down the cliff face towards the water, they're just waddling over into the nearest city.
When birds that are not great flyers yet move into an urban area where there's lots of people, they also are exposed to some novel predators like house cats or domestic dogs.
So in recent years, volunteers have begun to mark September by scurrying around with flashlights and boxes, scooping up puffins who have wandered into town and driving them to a nearby cliff where they give them a heave-ho toward the water.
There you go.
I asked Lyons, is that safe? What if the bird doesn't fly? And he seemed to say, it's kind of the question facing every fledgling, whether they're being tossed by a human or not.
They kind of bounce their way down the slope into the water, and most of the time they don't sustain any serious injuries from that.
And as this has become a more urgent need and therefore a more popular tradition in Iceland, it remains to be seen whether growing urban landscapes mean we will have to do this in the States. For now, he says, the puffins of Canada and Maine are fine, but lights play tricks on lots of birds. So during migration season, he says, please tell the owner of your local skyscrapers to turn their lights off at night. Hey, it's more polite than chucking a bird off a cliff. My favorite thing here is how little ducks are called ducklings, a little goose is called a gosling. This is called puffling season. So I hope you've had a good puffling season wherever you are. More on all these stories at abcnews.com or the ABC News app. I'm Brad Milkey. See you tomorrow.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you? Yes.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
Bring them on.
If only there was a place in the morning to start my day. With a smile, somewhere to help me get in the know. A place as spectacular as, well, me.
I think we might know a place, right, guys?
Bring your friends.
Oh, wait, there is.
Good morning, America.
GMA, 7A, every day. Boom, boom, boom.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Robin. Good morning, America. How are you?
Boom! Now that's how you start your day, people.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers.
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in